Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are around the world. I am not Lindsey Purcell. I am Cale Royer with TreeStuff.com. I do not have nearly the range or breadth of knowledge that Lindsey does. However, almost everything that I do know about arboriculture, I have learned from hosting his webinars here. Just want to give a little introduction to the webinar series. So, if you are watching this and you have an ISA certification, you can watch the whole thing at the end in the comment section, and at the description, I will post a link to a quiz that you can take. If you take that quiz, you can get one CEU towards your ISA certification for the year. If you are doing that live, like within now to the next 24 hours, you can get two CEUs. So, but if you're already past that, if you're watching this in the future, that's one CEU. And you can also do the same thing for any of the other webinars that we have on our YouTube channel or our Facebook channel in our webinar section. So go ahead and do that. It does take 4 weeks to 8 weeks to get that all updated, just by the sheer fact that we are the number one supplier of CEUs to the ISA, and that includes also the ISA itself. Lindsey is a great friend of ours. He has done. I'll let him talk about all the things that he's done. But one of the things that he's done with us is the TreeStuff Certified Arborist Prep course, which you can find on our website. That is supplied through the Vimeo app. And if you take that, it's a 30-day rental. You can watch all the videos. You can take the quizzes, and that should prepare you for taking the ISA Certified Arborist exam. If you are not thinking about doing the ISA Certified Arborist exam, please do. Please look into that. Your employer, if you are not employed, if you're not a single employer, if you're not on your own, your employer will pay more money if you're a certified arborist. Otherwise, if you are
That's a good
just,
thing.
yeah, if it's a good thing. If you're on your own and you're a certified arborist, that tells every single customer that you work with that there is something about you that is better than that just other random guy that they found on the Nextdoor app. So please look into that. Please look into being an ISA certified arborist and look into the TreeStuff Certified Arborist Prep course. Other things we have coming up each week on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Time, Nick and I are going live. We have just a 1 hour live stream show where we hang out, talk about the things that are going on in the arboriculture industry. We talk about new items. We have guests come on and talk about whatever their subject is that they're an expert in. And we also sometimes, maybe or maybe not, we give away free gear and a whole bunch of money. You might have to tune in to see if that actually happens. Maybe that
We
happens, maybe it doesn't.
TreeStuff has a history of being very generous.
We No one could hear me. There we go. All right, so Wednesday, just for that last section there. Wednesdays, noon Eastern time. Please watch live. You can ask questions. You can call in and you can talk to us. You can email live@treestuff.com and give us suggestions on what we should talk about, who we should have on the podcast. And if you can't watch, I understand. Everybody's working. You're up in a tree. I do post, trying to post that every Wednesday by the end of the day to every podcast that there is. So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podweezy, or whatever, any of them. There, if you search Tree Stuff, you should find us on the podcast there. So, and then we just talked about Lindsey. When are you gonna be on there?
December 17th.
December 17th. Lindsey.
I'll be giving away some books.
Giving away books, and then next week, I believe we have Rudy Rudamiller from Purcell, who's a great guy, great friend, ultra marathoner, and just absolute madman, is going to be on there. So please join us for that. Listen to the podcast. There might be ways that you can win money just by listening. Not going to say there is or there isn't. Maybe you have to listen to figure it out. So, without further ado, I've adoed too much. Lindsey, it is over to you, sir.
All right, buddy. Thank you. It's so good to be back here on Tree Stuff. I guess tree evangelizing, as I've been doing for over 40 years now. But we'll get right to it. We're going to talk about my favorite thing, and that's pruning. I have had the good fortune of working with who I affectionately call the godfather of pruning, Dr. Ed Gilman, for the last, 20 years. And more recently, we have been working together and teaching around the country on prescriptive pruning. You may have heard of it, or it may have come to a city or town near you, but I'll talk about some of that details of the prescription pruning qualification as well. So what I'm going to do is give you kind of an overview. I'm not sure what all to put in here. When I teach the course, it takes me 3 days, and I'm going to try to distill this down into 90 minutes or so, and give you some of the highlights and really cool, important things that we've learned through our rockstar researchers on pruning. We've been pruning for centuries, and we think we know what we're doing, but again, there's always something that comes up, and through research and we improve our practices, and the prescription pruning qualification certainly provides a lot of that information. I'm going to give you some of that, a sneak peek of that now. So one of the things that attracted to me about prescriptive pruning, I was a sales arborist for several years and worked in tree care and climbing and all the other things associated with it, from dragging brush to plant health care to climbing and sales. But one of the things that I learned a lot about was, and maybe you've come across this same situation, in the fact that you go check out the client's tree, and the tree owner tells you what they want, and you tell them what they need, and you agree upon this plan. And you got, all right, this is going to be great. So you give the information, whatever it might include, to the crew, and they get done with it, and you go back and check it out, and it's like, man, that is not what I wanted. And a lot of times, and this has happened to me frequently, and a lot of times it's just because we weren't able to articulate what we really wanted done. And so really what it comes down to is introducing you to kind of a new paradigm in pruning that allows us to better communicate our intentions and our needs. And a lot of it is because of definitions. And what I kind of technically, being an educator, I talk about arboricultural literacy. Oftentimes, when it comes to pruning, we don't get what we want or expect because we didn't properly communicate our intentions or our needs. And it's a challenge because the definitions and terms are not consistent and they're changing. And I'm having the hardest time with that now with a lot of companies in changing their terms and definitions based on the new standards and the new BMP. So to get what we want, we've got to be consistent and we got to be concise in our language and become more aware of how to communicate owners' objectives as far as which branches to prune and with the production arborist in performing that work. So as a result, that quality of work should become more consistent and the tree owners should receive a good value for their money because we can now better identify what to do and where to do it.
Lindsey, I'm going to stop you here
Yeah,
real quick.
yeah.
Who who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah, what have you done? What's your experience in the arboricultural
Oh,
industry?
well, I don't know. I guess I guess I forgot to talk about. I just make the assumption pretty much everybody knows who I am. But hey, I'm Lindsey Purcell, Scorpio. Like to take long walks on the beach. But besides that, well, I've been in the industry for my family had a garden center and nursery. Grandparents had that, and kind of was born into this industry and worked in our family business for many years, and then went to Purdue as an undergraduate and decided to stay in the industry up in Indianapolis. Worked for a landscape tree care company there for a while, and then I got a different itch for arboriculture and started working in urban forestry. I was the city forester in Indianapolis for several years, and then got the wonderful blessing of an invitation to teach at Purdue. And I taught at Vincent University and also Purdue University for 21 years of teaching undergraduate and graduate students. So and I recently retired. I guess not so recently now. It's been 3 years. Can't believe it. But now I have my own consulting company and fly around the country teaching about prescription pruning with Dr. Gilman, and then also teaching track and then do corporate training, private training for a lot of companies. So it's been fun. And I'm still the executive director of the Indiana chapter of the ISA. So I get to stay in contact with my Indiana peeps, although I live in Florida most of the time. But yeah, that's kind of a brief little resume. Oh, I wrote a book too
You
in my
you wrote
spare
a book,
time. So
yes,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is
So
which is called.
arboricultural practices. It's
and that will be on TreeStuff very soon. We're working with the publisher. They're giving us a little bit of a headache, but we are on that. And you are also the guy to go for, or the guy to listen to when it comes to ISA certification. Is that correct? Well, I would say you go above and beyond because you have don't you have like a chat uh, channel that you have with people who are going after their certification and answering questions there. So that's absolutely fantastic. And as the guy who has mostly, I would say, some say single-handedly, written the ISA certification. Is that correct? Pretty.
Yeah, let's talk about pruning a little more. All right, are we on? All right. So if you're going to take a picture of a slide, this is it. All right, these are the key things of all the 2.5 days of training that I provide and we provide for PPQ. These are the key things I'm going to talk about tonight. And they may not be things you think about. I mean, it kind of makes you go, huh, whenever we talk about those. But we talk about one of the things I don't think we recognize is the trees that we're pruning, especially these this coffee tree I was pruning. I think it was Ed and I were in Greeley, Colorado doing the course. And we don't recognize that, out of that 12, 15-foot tree, almost all the branches that are on that tree will not be there in 10 to 15 years. And I'll explain more about that a little later. Also, we have basically three types of pruning cuts in our toolbox. We use reduction cuts, removal cuts, and heading cuts. But knowing how to apply the proper cut makes a huge difference for the tree. Really doesn't matter to us. A cut's a cut. When we make a cut on the tree, it's like, well, instead of just reducing it, I'll just remove it and get it out of the way. But that has some serious implications for the tree from a physiological perspective. Also, I'll talk a little bit about branch aspect ratio to improve structure. Our goal is to create a strong, sustainable structure as we prune to make it more urban compatible, and how we can invigorate the leader to create a dominant leader system, which is critical for that stable structure. And then talk about locations on where to prune the crown. Good lands, I see some, well, substandard pruning, let's put it that way. And then how to identify those branches to prune based on branch aspect ratio. A lot of what you see tonight is going to come from some of the things that we teach in the PPQ, as we affectionately call it. It was a qualification that had been in development for about 3 to 4 years. But basically, it's a legacy project for Ed. And he's put all of his heart and soul into this qualification, and anybody that's taken it just says it's one of the best courses they've ever taken. And I have to agree. I had the opportunity to work on it with the committee and help with the development of the slides and the training materials, and enjoy teaching it a lot. So if you're interested in that, contact myself or the Florida ISA, then they can set you up with attending one, or if you're wanting to host one as a company or an organization, they can help you with that as well. So a little bit about that. Of course, I can answer more questions later, Kale, if there is. So getting back to the actual pruning process, the standards actually indicate to us that no tree should be pruned without clear goals or objectives for that action. So basically what they're saying is, what's your reason for going up that tree or getting out that pole saw or hand pruners? And we should have clear and concise objectives that are based on the needs of the tree and also client needs as well. And typically our reasons to prune can be really boiled down to 4 things, in my opinion and experience. Is the 3 primary things are structure, clearance, and appearance. reducing the risk of failure, creating that strong, stable structure that's sustainable, urban compatible, meaning that it is free of conflicts, infrastructure conflicts, whether it be buildings, stop signs, stop lights, street lights, whatever it is that is found where trees and people coexist. We want to make sure that they are urban compatible. And also important that it looks good, especially for the homeowner. And also being able to conform to the intended design and function that it performs when we plant a tree. And so we can actually say that it comes down again, and I know it's you've heard this a million times: right tree, right place. And by good golly, that's truly it. Because oftentimes as arborists, we inherit problems because there wasn't enough thought in the decision making process of how close to plant those trees. You see people plant red oaks 3 feet from a house, and spruce, within an arm's length from the corner of the house, and so forth. And then we have to come in and try to make sense of it, make it work, and oftentimes it just doesn't. It isn't possible. So, but the key to the pruning really is applying the correct pruning amount on the correct branches to correct structure and meet objectives. So that's kind of our single statement of what we want and try to accomplish when we're being prescriptive about our pruning. So, as I mentioned, common considerations include clearance and appearance, but also another important thing is managing risk. That's one of the primary reasons why we're pruning on trees. But on young trees and older trees, the objectives are a little different. Um, Young trees, we're directing growth. Each pruning cut we make, we can change the direction that tree is going to put on new growth and actually create a more compact and directional, urban compatible tree. We're on older, veteran trees what we call past medium age, usually in the 50 to 75-year range. All we're really doing is managing loads on the trees or managing the amount of stress on those attachments in the tree, and so they don't fail. Those are the common things that we think about when we're looking at trees and trying to decide what we want to accomplish with our objectives. And so I like to think of ourselves really as a problem solver. Prescription pruning is an approach that begins with listening to the owner's objectives, and because usually you're there because they've got an issue, they've got a concern, they got a problem. Hey, this doesn't look right. This tree branch is broken, or this tree makes me nervous. This branch, I just looked at a client's house not too long ago that they said the reason they called me is I've got this really long branch and it's big and it's overhanging my house where my daughter sleeps in her bedroom, and I'm just kind of worried about it. And then that's when I, do a prescription for them and help secure a proper tree care company that can do that and follow that. And then it's a beautiful thing. We can communicate with the same language. But our goal is to recognize the conditions, because oftentimes there's more to it than just their single concern, and then develop a plan for mitigation in the form of a prescription. And the things that we typically find or see in trees that we need to prune are called conditions of concern. This is why we're here. And there's a lot of different things that can be a part of that. We developed this whole list of basically through everything on the table that somebody's called one of our committee members for, or us working on this is like, why are you here? What are the things that we want to accomplish? But oftentimes when it comes to prescription pruning, the cause for concern is usually from an arborist perspective, are these four things. And the thing is conditions of concern or issues with the tree that require some mitigation through an arboricultural intervention like pruning isn't always a defect. But however, as these trees get bigger, the parts get bigger, and the load on these conditions increases, and that's when we advance to a defect. and often requires an increased intensity in those mitigation options. So the things I really look for, like with this particular crown, and this was a tree in Texas, and I'm looking for those co-dominant stems. And I'm looking for branches with large aspect ratios, which have an increased likelihood of failure. Those low aggressive vertical growing branches that are competing with the leader, and then poor branch spacing that can create clusters within the tree as it develops and create a weak attachments as well. So our goal here really is to manage tree structure through that prescriptive pruning and identifying branch union attributes which guide our pruning. And those are those with the large aspect ratios that are our branches to prune. So we'll talk a little bit about how to identify those moving forward. But I want to go back to something that we talked about earlier. And if you look at this graphic, that you can see that whenever you plant a tree, all those branches are temporary. And 5 to 10 years later, we start seeing the beginning of the permanent crown. So most of the time, what happens, which is really a big mistake on the part of the arborist or horticulturalist, is these branches that they feel are going to get in the way of clearance, they just remove them. They'll just cut them here. Well, this is going to get in the way. This is going to get in the way. So let's just cut them off. Well, that sounds like the reasonable thing to do, which would be implementing a removal cut. But when this tree is small, it needs all the relief area it can get in order to establish itself. So we'll talk about this as we do a pruning prescription, but the key is to just reduce it, get it out of the way, just reduce it. And what that does is it prepares it for a removal cut later. And I'll explain how that works when we get into actual pruning cuts. But when we go up to a tree, our first instinct is to cut these guys off down here where people are going to run into them with pedestrians or with a car. But again, the goal is to reduce them to get them out of harm's way if possible. And then we can remove them later. So I don't know how many of you have pruned trees this size before, and you actually consider which are the permanent branches, which are the lowest permanent branches. And those are the branches we will not prune. We will reduce those low temporary branches that are useful for the tree and establishment and getting the tree off to a good start. But that's critical in the planning process and develop your prescription. So as the tree develops and matures, that's when these were once the temporary or the permanent branches in that smaller tree. But as a tree grows and develops, that's when we'll go in and make some well-intentioned removal and reduction cuts in order to get that strong, stable structure. So I alluded to a term that's probably many of you are familiar with: identified branches to prune. It's all about branch aspect ratio. And I asked Ed, this has been several years ago, I started talking about pruning. I said, well, if you had to talk about the most important thing about pruning, what would you say? And he said, if I would have one slide, and that would be prune the branches with the largest aspect ratios. Mic drop. Of course, Ed, we got to have more than one slide, obviously. But he said that's the most salient point when it comes to pruning, is recognizing poor aspect ratio. And if I were to pick that out on this tree, here is probably the most obvious. You can see that these two branches, we often call them co-dominant, but really, and from a physiological perspective, only trunks or stems can be co-dominant. These are just branches with poor aspect ratio. And we see another one here. Here's another one. So these would be branches to prune. We can see another one here, another one down here. They're all over the tree. and that's because they haven't been structurally pruned after planted. So by definition, branch aspect ratio is just basically um, the best practice for identifying potential of failure. And when we talk about aspect ratio, we're looking at their relationship to each other as far as size. So, for example, this maple branch union here, we see our branch bark ridge, and then we have these two branches that are exactly the same size. And this is an easily separated branch under any type of load. So our goal is actually to come up with have a branch attachments that is this to where the origin, if we were to use our terminology for the pruning qualification, this branch should be half the size, or this branch should be twice the size of the branch coming off of it. If you could talk about the ideal structure, if you were going to artificially engineer a tree, you would have your trunk, and then you would have your first order branches coming off of that. Now, those first order branches would be half the size of the trunk. Now, your second order branches would be half the size of the first order branch. Everything would be half the size, moving from trunk to main branch to secondary branch to tertiary branch. That would be the ideal tree with perfect aspect ratio and well attached branches. And that's the goal basically when we look at branch aspect ratio. So if you look at an example of that, so here are branches with small aspect ratios. This is ideal, again, where we have a 2-to-1 ratio. This one, as my wife always says, it's not terrible. Well, no, that means it's good, I guess. I'm not sure. I have to interpret that. But here we're getting close to that 1-to-1 ratio. This is the strongest of these two unions. This would be the weakest of those. So we have a 1-to-2 or 3-to-4. That when you get at that 3-to-4 and greater, obviously the next step is 4-to-4, which means it's a 1-to-1 union, which is what we see here. So we see the V-shaped bifurcation here and the cup-shaped bifurcation here, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But these are weaker unions of 1-to-1 ratio, and that's a condition of concern. So if I were to say prune the branches with poor aspect ratio, these would be the branches to prune. This branch up here, I would even consider pruning this branch. This would maybe, because of that close proximity to the 1-to-1 ratio. But that's how we make the decision on what branches to prune is based on aspect ratio. And when you start thinking in those terms, when you're up in the tree or up in the crown, either on rope or in a lift, though it reduces the amount of pruning that you have to actually implement, because you don't have to prune those branches with the poor aspect ratio or with the good aspect ratio, unless there's a clearance issue. So if we were to guess what the aspect ratio here is, I know can't actually audibly talk about it, but if each one of these segments is the same length, we see that this is about, we'll say 9 centimeters, as opposed to this one, which is 3. So our aspect ratio would actually be a 3-to-9 ratio, and breaking that down to the lowest common terms, it's a 1-to-3 ratio. It's 30% the size of its first order branch. This would be a first order branch, and this would be a second order branch. Or it's a 1/3 ratio. And this is kind of that ideal structure that we're looking to perpetuate and cultivate within that tree. So going back to what I was talking about earlier, so the weaker unions, the larger aspect ratios are the branches to prune when it comes to creating and sustaining strong attachments. So these are what we would look at as far as reducing or remove to prevent failure. So these are a couple of branch attachments that I cut in two, just to look to see what's going on in there that makes it so bad. What's the issue? And what it comes down to basically is, again, we've got a 1-to-1 ratio here. So we can see that we do have a little bit of a branch bark ridge here, but because of that ratio, look to where these intersect, and they're kind of right down the middle here. So these would be easy to split apart if you were to load them. For example, on the left there, that branch would more likely split, as opposed to this one on the right. This is about, again, almost a 3-to-1 ratio. But look at that, how far in that branch goes into this main stem. So, or this first order branch. So you can see that it's well connected into that. This branch isn't going to break here. Oftentimes, when we see a small aspect ratio and a good attachment, you won't find a break at the attachment. In fact, my friend Dr. Greg Dahl at West Virginia did a study on branch allometry and where branches fail, and found that good branch attachments typically fail 6 to 12 centimeters past their attachment point, which is right here. Now, you guys that do storm damage, I used to do, I look at these and say, oh yeah, this one would be the one that would fail right at that attachment, just kind of split off. Where this one, it would be broken further down the branch here as a result of some type of load, whether it be wind load or ice or snow or something like that. So the key thing here is branches with that large aspect ratio are better reduced than removed, because also the other thing it doesn't create is a branch protection zone, which is where those very important recovery chemicals are located in order to create coated. So I want to show you an example. This is a poor aspect ratio. Can you see that, Kale, all right?
It's all right. It's coming through a little choppy, but yeah, we can see.
Okay, so you can see this is a 1-to-1 ratio, and you can see that it breaks very easy because, again, there's not a good interconnection between the branches. And this really tells a story. So in order to prevent this from happening, we would reduce this branch in order to reduce the load on this attachment. Now let's contrast that with the 1-to-3 ratio. Now watch how this is pulled. And watch how nothing happens. That's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Right, that's so satisfying.
If a picture or video tells a thousand stories, this would be it. In demonstrating how that small aspect ratio really makes a difference in its ability to withstand loads. So if you're going to make a decision on branches and their strength, so there's no inclusions in this, so which branch union would be stronger, the one on the left or the right? Well, hopefully you said the one on the right. And the reason being is, if we look at the stem, this is obviously less than half of its origin, where this one is getting real close to a 1-to-1 ratio here. So the attachment into the tree would not be nearly as strong. So this would be the branch to prune to reduce the load on this attachment here, as opposed to this one, which would have a much stronger integration into the stem than its counterpart here on the other side. And we see this quite frequently. If you look at storms and look at damage created by trees, we often see that this is very evident. Now, you notice that we have a tree failure here, which everybody's just absolutely fascinated with, and for good reason. This was a 10-inch to 10-inch branch, and this is the one that failed, 1-to-1 ratio. Now, we look at this one, which is a 3-to-4 or 7-to-10 ratio. It cracked at the union, but it didn't break. But look at the little guy down here. Aspect ratio was 3-to-1. Absolutely no failure. And look you see these ridges along here. This is the overlapping of that trunk over the branch as it expands. So this is exactly why this didn't fail, is the fact that this is well integrated into here. You don't see that here, and we certainly didn't see it with this 1-to-1 ratio large branch and this multi-stem leader. So obviously the smaller the ratio, the stronger the union is the takeaway point here. And we can see this happen with branchwood quite frequently. So it's what we call intermingling with the trunk wood, and it forms a branch collar. And just as importantly, the branch bark ridge. This is what creates a good attachment, which is opposite of sprouts. When we see sprouts, those are basically epicormic sprouts that have been created from latent dormant buds just under the bark layer. And really cool picture here. You can see where this is that overlapping material where the overlapping material, the trunk was for this branch, similar to what I just showed you where you saw those ridges. This is it. And what does it remind you of? It's almost like a lag screw that's been screwed into the trunk or to another larger branch, and it's not going anywhere, folks. So those are strongly embedded into the trunk, and its likelihood of failure is extremely low, especially at the attachment. So now when we turn this over to co-dominant stems, another thing that was very important, and probably all of you have maybe, or some of you have heard about, was Dr. Slater's research over at Myers Cove College, where he's spent basically the last 15 years looking at tree crotches and determining their likelihood of failure. And how do we grade these based on their likelihood of failure? Well, what he determined, and what I've seen, these are the ones that I cut in half and we're examining. We have two types of co-dominant stems. We have a V-shaped bifurcation, which you see here, and we have a cup-shaped bifurcation here. And you'll notice that there are some distinctive differences between the two. You'll notice that we have this integration of the two branches together. We have a branch bark ridge here. Now, if you look in contrast to this one, we don't have a branch bark ridge. What we do have is decay and a 1-to-1 ratio. Even though this is closer to 1-to-1, it is less likely to fail than the V-shaped bifurcation with some inclusion in it. So V-shape versus cup shape, they're not all alike, nor are they all bad. And Slater demonstrated this with his research and doing failure tests and finding out that this branch bark ridge is extremely important. It's almost like if you take your hands and do this, put them together, that's not going to come apart very easy. But if you just put your hands together like this, making that V shape, and have somebody pull your arms apart, it's very easy, as opposed to this. And a tree's intermingling of that branch wood is exactly the same way. So you can see this is one of Duncan's photos where he's left the branch bark ridge here. This is where the branch was coming down to here. And you can see where this branch bark ridge is just really twisted and tortuous and just kind of just holding on like your fingers intertwined together. And that's where, if you were to skin the bark off the tree, this is the top of the crotch here, or the branch union, and you can see where all of that is intermingled and just crazy, holding each other together. And this is that key attachment to get that biomechanical strength. Now, if they're really close together also, this is what squeezes off our vascular system, reducing the mass flow of assimilates to the rest of the branch. And that's often why we get decline, because basically the vascular system has been squeezed down. And in the urban forest, this is quite common. We see this in planted trees all the time, where we get the V-shaped bifurcation with included bark up here, and we have this partial inclusion here, where we typically see the resulting double ridge. And this is where we would make our cut if we were going to try to reduce that likelihood of failure. But there's no connection here on the wood. And this is something that would easily be pulled apart. And they'll continue for many years. So as that tree gets bigger, as I mentioned earlier, the load on those parts increases well. And I'm going to see what time it was. And this is basically going to get worse. It's not going to go away. It's not going to get any better. So this is the 10-inch. 10 years later, you can, on the same tree, you can see this total inclusion here, and we have our partial inclusion here. So this is where those two intersect, which what was once here is now up here, and then inclusion's now gone in farther into the tree. And so again, here was in 2002, and eventually the tree failed. You know, it may not be a quick failure, but I often say when, you know, it comes to this type of tree structure, it's not a matter of if it fails, it's a matter of when it's going to fail. And that's when the loads exceed the capacity of that defect to carry that load. And it takes as a predisposition, such as this weak structure, and then a secondary issue, such as a external load, and that's what causes the failure. So enough about that. I don't know. Is there any questions so far, Cale?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here.
I'll take that as a no.
We'll
go ahead and move forward. If there's any questions, please let Cale know.
Can you not hear me?
Now, where to prune. Now, I know it sounds kind of silly as far as where to prune, but, you know, I see a lot of substandard pruning. I'll put it that way. So identifying where to prune is also part of that communication package in the prescription pruning, making sure we identify the exterior branches, interior branches, which are closest to the trunk and the interior of the tree. Oftentimes we'll see a cluster up here, and this is a indicative of a weak attachment. And the reason being, the clusters and multiples leaders are weak attachments is the fact that their close proximity to each other disallows them to create branch collars and good attachments into integrated intermingling into their origin. This is a branch with a small aspect ratio. So you can see that the stem goes all the way up here. This would be our first order branch here, and it's a small aspect ratio. Now, here's one with a large aspect ratio. So this is on this branch, and relationship to the trunk is almost a one-to-one ratio. And so as a result, this would be a branch to prune, and this may not be because it really isn't, it's structurally and biomechanically sound. So there's our dominant leader. You can see it goes all the way up through here, and then we get into a little problem with this cluster of branches, and this is where we need to start reduction pruning in order to establish a more dominant leader in the top of the tree. So the pruning zone, where is that? For heaven's sakes, yes, we know it's all the way up here. Nothing should be going on in the inside of this area unless we have some other condition like cracked branch or perhaps or crossing branches, but everything should be going on in the periphery of the tree. If it's not going on out there and it's going on in here, what do we call that? Yep, lion's tailing or lion tailing. I never know if it's plural or not. But anyway, this is where we are creating a biomechanical nightmare for the tree by removing those interior branches, forcing the load or the center of mass farther out on that lever arm. And that's when we get an increased likelihood of failure due to the bending and swaying from those external loads. Now, the next on the list, and this is stuff you've heard before, but this is getting perhaps into some new territory as far as definitions and dialogue in the prescription pruning, and that's branch order. Now, I talked about first, second order branches already. So let me give you an explanation of how that works. So branch order, for example, to identify branches, we use this system regardless of their size. And this was borrowed from basically biology when it comes to naming things. And it's almost like a highway, if you will, where we have the interstate and then we have branch a road that goes off of. We got an interstate, then we got a state road. That's a first order branch, first order road. Then we have a county road that comes off of that. That would be a second order. Well, it's very similar to this in the fact that basically what it comes down to is following the leaders. So we follow the main first order branch all the way out to the tip of the tree branch. That's first order. So for example, if we were to start here on this tree, we would follow this to the first bifurcation, which is right here. Now, this is a first order branch here because we follow the largest. This one is smaller, so we call this a second order branch. Now we continue to follow to the next bifurcation, and we see that this is smaller, this one's larger, so we leave this is a second order branch, and this we still continue out. We've got more branch to cover here. We go to the next split, and whichever's largest, that becomes our first order branch, and this is our first order branch all the way out to the tips. So these are second order branches. This is first order branch. So again, it's about the communication in identifying this, because oftentimes if you're a PPQ advocate, you're saying you want to reduce the poor aspect ratio branches on the 5 largest first order branches, and that's pretty much it. But there's a little more to it in details, but this is the first step in being able to communicate prescription pruning, is to recognize branch orders. So all of these are second order branches because they are smaller than the first order branches. And so this is typically where we'll do a lot of our pruning. For example, we can make some cuts on second order branches to get down to the first order. But again, the same thing works for second order branches. If we come to the first split, then this would be a third order branch. Same here, we follow the largest, and this would be a third order branch, and that's pretty much where we stop in that process. So if you look at a tree that I was doing some pruning on, you can see that this is our attachment point. So our first order branch would be following the largest of these. So this is a second order branch. This is a second order branch. It goes all the way out here. Where they come together, these can both be second order branches. And then we come out to here. This is the largest of the two, so we follow this as a second order branch. So it's as simple as that. And then if we want on this overextended branch, if we said, hey, we have a fear of failure here because it's got a nasty little booger here, cavity, defect, and it has an increased likelihood of failure, but we don't want to cut that branch off yet. So we would say we want to reduce the loading on this attachment. We would prescribe cutting the first order back 6 to 8 feet, or cut back to this next lateral, second order lateral. So this is how we would prescribe that in order to communicate that reduction pruning. Now, quickly moving into types of cuts, I won't belabor this point because most of you have seen and know about these. But as I mentioned earlier, the pruning cuts going to apply include the 3 removal cut. Basically removes a branch from a trunk or another branch. It takes the smallest and leaves the larger. So we're cutting a smaller branch back to a large branch, and that is a removal cut. And then reduction cut just basically reduces the length of a branch back to a lateral of equal or smaller diameter. So you can see the cut I made on this maple. You can see this is a first order branch. This is our second order here. So in order to reduce the likelihood of failure for this attachment, I basically made a 2.5-inch cut here back to a proper lateral, as you see over here. And this effectively reduced the weight or the load on that branch, which would hopefully decrease the likelihood of failure in this situation. Now, heady cuts, I know a lot of people just kind of poo-poo these and that's topping or that's not cutting back to a proper lateral. But hey, it's in the standards. We can use it. It's a part of our tools. And one of the reasons why we use this primarily is to prevent making large trunk cuts, as you see on this guy here. So this is a sugar maple, nice sugar maple that was growing into the neighbor's house. Now, in order to reduce that conflict, they were thinking, just cut that branch off. But this measures as an 8-inch trunk cut. That's a big wound on that tree, which is known pretty much as a poor compartmentalizer. So as a result, if we make that big trunk cut, we got this huge wound here that will allow decay to set in on that tree. That's the last thing we want to do. So in order to basically buy time, make a heady cut back to any lateral and see if this makes it. I've been photo documenting these branches for 3 years now. And so what? We might, by leaving a few little branches here or twigs, we bring some resources to that area that hopefully it will compartmentalize, and this may even take over as another branch. But what if it dies? Well, not a big deal. So I can cut it back to here. All these little tiny spurs that are coming off of here are really, really important because it's bringing resources for recovery into that vicinity. Sugars, starches, assimilates that are necessary in order for that tree to recover from those wounds. So what if this one dies? Hey, look, I got another one back here. I got another one back here. So I've got years before I have to finally make that trunk cut, which I'm trying to avoid. So don't hesitate to use it. And this is very common when you're doing storm work mitigation as well, as far as trying to reestablish the crown. You got to make some heading cuts, and then you start using the 1/3 rule to determine how to properly restore that crown to a good stable structure. So, all right, enough about that for the cuts. Now let's talk about how much do we prune. Expressing the amount to prune, or the dose, as we call it, is probably the most challenging part of the pruning prescription. The number and diameter or size of pruning cuts is what we use. So it's more important to prescribe amount on appropriate branches based on size of cuts or diameter of cut. Number. Now, what I've used typically, and we all know that we see it in the standards, is 30%. We've heard this for years, no more than 25 or 30%. What does that mean? Everybody in this listening to this would have a different idea of what a quantity of 30% means. And oftentimes it's not even an appropriate amount. I mean, I've pruned as much as 70 to 80% off of a small tree before. If the tree's got the health and the vigor and the capacity to recover, then it's acceptable. But the pruning dose really comes down to one thing, and that is in the standards and the BMPs. Prune only what is needed to meet objectives. A large debris pile may not yield the most desirable outcome. And a lot of folks look at that in the back of the chipper truck and look to see just how much you've been doing. So the amount of material that needs to be removed is really governed by client objectives, the condition of the tree, the pruning cycle or pruning interval, and basically the tree's ability to tolerate pruning. So pruning dose depends a lot on interval. For example, we may need, if we need to take half the crown away in order to establish a good stable crown, we may have to make 2 or 3 stabs at it over a period of perhaps 3 to 5 years in order to not stress the tree out, in order making all those cuts. But I get it, sometimes you only get one shot, and then you got to make some really good informed decisions on what to prune, where to prune, and how much to prune. So in a prescription, when we prune, basically we prescribe it. There's a couple of different ways we can say it. And I measure this based on the size of the tree, typically. So a lot of times we'll use a combination of number and size of cuts. For example, we will, on the largest aspect ratio branches, the main first order branches, we're going to make 3 4-inch diameter reduction cuts. Okay, so basically what you're doing is you're following the end of the branch back to a proper lateral that's about 4 inches. And that's how we determine how much to cut there. Or we may specify a number of feet of a branch length to remove. And having worked with a lot of different arborists and teaching this, a lot of them feel that that's a little easier to prescribe and communicate. And it's especially on smaller trees. So you can say, look, instead of taking a 2-inch or 1-inch cut, say just take 3 feet off, 2 feet off, whatever that metric is, down to a proper lateral. And that will communicate what you want. But again, the 20 to 30% from 2 largest branches, what does that tell you? It's not very subjective, and it's not very accountable. And everyone I've worked with and taught this to agree that after they have worked the prescription and actually done the pruning, completed the pruning, this was a much better way. And I'll admit, when I first got started in this a few years ago at the prescription pruning, I'm like, oh, this ain't going to work, man. I mean, there's just no way that we can communicate this. And I mean, it's easy from the ground of the sales arborist to say, look, we're going to make, 5 reduction cuts, 2 removal cuts on this tree. But then you say, we're going to make 3-inch cuts on the 5 largest branches. Well, that's easy to say from the ground, but I wrote my own prescription, went up in the tree, and I'm like, okay, now I see really how this works. And it's pretty easy if you have the opportunity to write the prescription and actually do the work, it really is a cathartic experience. But it really, what it takes is working together with what we call the producer, which is the person who's doing the work, and the prescriber, which is a person that is basically has a prescription pad writing that prescription. So pruning dose, we'll talk about this here in a second, but one of the things I wanted to show you was too that the reason why we want to watch our maximum cut diameter is based on the physiological composition of the tree. And we look at basically the comparison of the amount of heartwood, which is non-living wood, in relationship to the amount of sapwood. And we know why that's important, because if we go above the threshold of sapwood to heartwood, this is where we have slower recovery or slower healing, compartmentalization, and an increased likelihood of decay. So oftentimes if the prescription says, a big tree, especially, working on live oaks and things like that, trees, big trees, big branches, I may prescribe a 4.5 to 5-inch cut. Well, that's a big cut. So what I will do and recommend is I'll make successive cuts back to that point. So I'll go to the end of the branch and how do we do that? Right there. This is 3 inches. This is 5 inches. This is 2.5 inches. We have an internal measuring device right here. And I'll actually slide my hand down to the proper lateral that's into that 5-inch range. I'm just going to say, here's my target cut. But I suspect that there's going to be a disproportionate amount of heartwood to sapwood. And so what I will do is I'll make a few cuts ahead of that to a good lateral and just kind of look at the branch and say, well, yeah, okay, there's a little heartwood there. So I'll keep back till I get to my target spot. Everything's kumbaya. Now, if I start cutting and you have a disproportion like this heartwood, like you see here, is more out in here like this, then I'm going to say, whoa, 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 we need, and I'll tell the prescriber, I'll say, hey, I know you wanted a 4-inch cut, 5-inch cut on this branch, but as I was cutting down in that 3-inch area, the heartwood was really starting to expand, leaving little sapwood. Right on, man. That's exactly what I want to hear. So you good critical decision, critical thinking, good decision making. We took care of business. So the thing is, we don't want to compromise the health of the tree just to meet our objectives. I get it. Sometimes there's always that asterisk where we got to, we got to get clearance or safety is an issue. But if we can all abide by the biology of the tree, then it's certainly the best thing to do. So when we write a prescription, basically these are the key components here. Locating where in the crown to prune, what branches to cut, largest aspect ratios, cut types, reduction or removal, pruning amount, depends on the number of branches that need pruned. And this is typically what a prescription will look like. So our pruning interval is 2 years. Hey, we're going to come back in 2 years and finish this because we don't want to take any more off than we will in this first visit. Concerns, branches may fail. We want a longer lived tree. So the arborist and the owner develop this part here. The owner says, hey, I'm afraid this branch is going to fail. I have weddings under this tree and picnics and babies and stuff, and we don't want anybody hurt here. But you see that there's some bigger issues here. We got poor aspect ratio, we got a co-dominant, we got competition with the leader. And so that's when the arborist says, we've got some more work here. While we're here, we're going to take care of the structure and create a stronger, stable tree for those to be around. So, for a tree, you may have 20 to 25 inch, I always use like 2 to 3 inch reduction cuts to give the climbing arborist a little latitude to determine what's best for the tree. At the end of the 3 largest first order branches, and then, of course, remove any dead branches there. That always should be an issue. Limitations, arborists, like I'll say, no removal cuts on the leader, and also maybe no trunk cuts, especially if we're looking at large branches. So just an example of what it looks like, and this is what the prescription form appears to be, and it's available in the book. But this is our condition of concern we just talked about. Our objectives would be to reduce likelihood of failure, improve structure. This is where we put the number of cuts and the size, for example, 22 to 3 inch cuts, using reduction cuts here, and at the periphery of the tree. Or you may put, if there's specific areas you want to take care of, you may put a cardinal direction there. Limitations could include no trunk cuts, no cuts on the dominant leader, and then, of course, the other associated information along with that. So these are the vital elements here: your conditions, your objectives, number of cuts, size of cuts, pruning cut types, and where to prune. Those are the keys. So, for example, if we wanted to take a look at that and say the owner wants to reduce the risk of failure of this big branch here. So it's overextended, and perhaps it has an unacceptable level of risk for the tree owner. So prescriber estimates that a light in weight reduction will meet our objective. We're going to reduce the weight. So if you're to look at this branch, let's say this branch weighs 1,000 pounds and is 20 feet up in the air. That's 20,000 foot-pounds of torque on this attachment. So when I see an overextended branch or similar to this, I go straight to the attachment and look at the integrity of the attachment, see if there's any defects, decay. I also look at branch taper, which is a very important indicator of branch integrity and its strength. So that'll give us also an idea of how aggressive do we need to get on this branch to reduce it? So you can see based on what I've talked about earlier, we've got two or three options here that we can bring things back. So the prescription is 3 2.5 inch reduction cuts in order to basically lighten the load off Fanny. So we'll start at the base of the branch here, and we're going to follow the largest at each fork. And this is where we will basically have the opportunity to make our first cut. Now, if we want to get more aggressive, we could cut here. But let's say the tree's not doing so good. It kind of looks that way, doesn't it? Got a lot of sprouts, got a lot of dead branches. So maybe we don't get as aggressive. So we're going to make a cut here, or we could make a cut here. Again, it depends on how aggressive we can get with the tree, but the prescriber said a 2.5 inch reduction cut. So we're going to slide back to the largest lateral. Same thing with this one. We're going to make a 2.5 inch reduction cut here. I know the scale may not look appropriate to you, but play along with me. But also notice too, you notice that you got two branches here. We're going to make both of them are the same size, 2.5 inches. So which one do we cut? The key thing to remember there, and this is based on research that we've long known, is you want to keep the orientation of the branches flat. So we would take the upright growing branch here and leave this flat lateral. Now we go back to the other branch. We're going to make a reduction cut here, or we can even get back into here and make a cut into this. But here we're getting into a heading cut. So basically we got 3 reduction cuts at 2.5 inches, and we got a dead branch here and a broken branch here. So that pretty much worked one branch. So there are 3 reduction cuts in our prescription that are 2.5 inches, and then also 2 removal cuts on our target branch. So I know it sounds simple and pretty easy here in relationship to if you were doing that in real life, but again, this is where you start, and it's just basically taking it slow and looking at one branch, and eventually, take my word for it, after doing this for a couple of years now, especially teaching it, you just kind of see it. You block out all the hundreds of branches in that crown, and you just look for those largest first order branches and start identifying the bad aspect ratios on those, and those are our branches to prune in order to improve our stability of our tree. So all right, let's take a look at another concern here. Hold on just a second. Hello?
So, hey, Lindsey, for
Yeah.
some reason, I don't know why, no one, you can't hear me, but everyone else can. I don't know why, but you can't hear me, but everyone else can. I have some questions for you. I'll feed. Yes, everyone can hear you. I don't. I have absolutely no idea what's going on here, but you can't hear me. Everyone else can. Um, so I've got some questions here, and I think we could probably work from where you were and go backwards a little bit. So your prescription pruning um, that you were talking about, that form that you have, where is that available online? Okay. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Are your AirPods connected to your phone? Because now, not here. So can you see my? There's a chat. If you look to where you could see me earlier, There's like a little chat thing, and I've put questions up there for you. Okay, I'm going to hang up, and hopefully we'll get your audio back. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Trying to figure out what's going on here with Lindsey's audio and my hair. In the meantime, I think I would like to talk a little bit about the CEUs that are available. So I will post a quiz link in the comment section here in a little bit, and hopefully we can get him back. And when you take that quiz, you should be able to get all of them, 20 out of 20. If you get 16 out of 20, you are able to actually still get those CEUs. And otherwise, I'm vamping here. This is... it's not always like this. I'm sorry. But what we have going on right now, so Nick is on his way to Charlotte. If you are in the North Carolina area, just in that general area, not just North Carolina, he is coming to the Charlotte TCC with some other people. And he'll be there with his camera, which is his new thing, taking photos. If you go to treestuff.com/photos, you can see the photos that we've taken at the tree climbing competitions recently, as well as at TCI Expo, which are really great. If you've been at either of those, then go there and you should be able to see yourself. Probably, hopefully. Here we go. Let's see if Lindsey is back. Also, the Charlotte is going on starting tomorrow. And Lindsey's back. I can hear you. They can't hear you yet. I've got to reload you into my software here. I need somebody else. Somebody in the comments start vamping for me while I work on some technology stuff here. All right, there's Lindsey.
Question. I see the question, big question mark. All right, questions. All right, so I see number one, so on the main objective would be not to cut where there is heartwood at your cut. There will be heartwood there, but we just want a minimal amount. We want to significantly more
sapwood to reduce the amount of decay there. What was the rule about pruning into heartwood? Yeah, it's just there's not necessarily a ratio or a steadfast rule on that. It's just as the amount of heartwood increases in the center of that branch, then the slower it's going to be to recover. Because obviously the heartwood's dead, the sapwood's living, and that's where compartmentalization will occur. Um, the branch tubes are overlapping ridges, springwood, and yeah, I mean basically that's every year there's a new wrapping of wood, which is as the tree puts on lateral meristematic growth, then that's what's going to overlap the branch wood. The trunk wood grows faster than the branch wood, so that's why you get that overlapping as well. So, can you prune a tree that's been dealing with drought stress for a while, and also uh, the more stressed it is, the smaller the pruning dose. Because remember, whenever you're pruning a tree, we're putting it into stress, and we don't want to increase that with having additional wounds and to reallocate resources to um, in order to keep it declining. All right, can you see what's going on now, Kale? Okay. It's black? Boy, this is a mess. Until the phone rang. Share screen. All right. Yeah, he. Well, storm damaged trees. That's a tough one based on what we know. It depends on the amount of crown left, and um, also what really matters too is what kind of condition was that tree going into that storm that suffered all that mechanical damage. If the trees was pretty healthy going into that, then you have a chance of recovering the crown. But believe me, it's a long, arduous process, and it takes a lot of patience and time and money in order to do that. Yeah, sure. How about now? Okay, I'll finish up here. I've just got a few slides left. So, all right. So let's talk about last thing I want to talk about too, and this is really cool to see, and you'll never look at these trees the same way again. I promise you. All right. So w- we can see this tree is a big, terrible mess because you can see we got a lot poor aspect ratio. We've got just you see these lower. We should have one dominant leader here, and that leader comes from this point here and goes all the way up through here. And then it just kind of gets lost. It's like, where do we go? So we want to take the straightest if we can. But the key thing I want you to look at is we've got this express leader. We've got this cluster of branches in here, and we need vehicle clearance. So there's really about 6 branches to prune and in order to recover our leader. So one of the things I want you to see that's really important here is look, here's where the trunk stops, okay? Now we got these cluster of branches. look at it where how quickly the leader declines right above that cluster. I mean, and the reason is pretty simple and logical. All of these aggressive lower vertical branches are stealing the energy from that leader. And so, in order to establish that strong leader, what do we got to do? So, this is basically the nursery tree. And it's still obvious there with that cluster of branches. And that leader is suppressed because of this cluster. Now, how do we do that? We The suppressed leader, lack of dominant leader, basically we want to prune those branches and slow them down. So we would put a large dose of pruning on these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 laterals. Those are our branches to prune right there. Now we're going to make reduction cuts on those to bring them down. Again, we may say here, we may make 3 to 5 reduction cuts on each branch. So we'd have a total of maybe 30 cuts on those branches. Now, what I want to tell you though, that's going to be critical, and you'll see this in examples if you ever take the pruning qualification course and or even one of my pruning courses. But when you prune a branch, it slows growth tremendously. Any branch that's pruned slows growth. And that allows that energy to be diverted. You can see the arrows back to the leader. So if we're slowing the laterals down, the dominant leader is getting more resources. And you will see after a period of even 3 to 5 years, that leader will just start expanding. All that growth goes into this area where we want it by reducing these back to flat or horizontal laterals. So my prescription on this tree began with about 20 to 25 2 to 4 inch reduction cuts, plus a removal cut here on this lower cluster in order to get clearance, but also to reduce the number of branches in that cluster. So that's as simple as it gets. And again, that critical point is look at the difference between the size of the leader here and right above that cluster. That's probably a third the size of that. And the only reason being is because there's too many pipes to feed. So if there was a column of water going up from that trunk, it's basically by the time it gets past into all those clustered branches, there's none left for here. And so it's basically just not getting any resources because those other pipes are taking all of it. So that's another key point there. One of the key things is establishing that dominant leader is to invigorate it by reducing the other branches. So that's pretty much the final big point there that makes all the difference. So just kind of finishing up real quick. As far as our pruning goes, we want to think about structure, creating that strong, stable structure with a dominant leader system, good aspect ratio branches. Um, Try to establish the clearance that we need, either through one pruning session or perhaps a series of pruning sessions, depending upon how aggressive we can get in relationship to the conditions of the tree, the environmental conditions. If it's in drought stress, and we can't be as aggressive. Also, one of the best ways to know what to do is look at the ends of these branches where you can reach them. Look at the terminal buds, the terminal growth from the last 2 to 3 years. You got little small increments, the tree's in trouble. You got nice big long growing points there, everything's pretty kumbaya, then that's we can get a little more aggressive. So but by pruning, we're invigorating the leader. By pruning those lateral branches, we're also shifting growth to the places we want it if we're pruning on the periphery as well. So just kind of a recap real quickly. What pruning prescriptions include, the conditions of concern, the interval, the pruning system's always natural. What our objectives are, pruning cut types, the size of our cuts and locations, and how many to remove, as we just showed you. Also, I think it's pretty neat to recognize that the branches on these newly established trees will not be there 10 to 15 years later. So we need to establish what our lowest permanent branches are before we start hacking on those smaller trees. Then aspect ratio is used to locate our branches to prune. If they have a good aspect ratio of that 2 to 1 or less, you don't prune them. They don't need it. Then the pruning amount is typically expressed by a combination of number and size of branches. Um, and then, as I mentioned, and you will easily be able to see, pruning slows growth on those lateral branches, and it's preferable to reduce rather than remove on any tree. But sometimes we have to do removal cuts. But I can tell you, I'm on pruning prescriptions. I'm oftentimes 10 to 1 reduction cuts to removal cuts. Um, and then a pruning dose depends on the pruning interval, like if you're going to be there every 5 years or maybe once, it just depends. So that's key things to remember there. So that's all, Kale. I hope we made it pretty well through without getting in too much technological trouble. But
Uh,
is there any other questions?
I've I've got questions to last us for a couple more hours, but I think the key here is that you shut it off. I was just gonna say to make sure that everybody has your contact information. lpconsultinggroup.org. Oh, now he's totally gone. All right. Yes, Lindsey, you can find. There he is. You can find Lindsey at lpconsultinggroup.org. I've got a couple questions here. You mentioned pruning back to horizontal branches. Can you speak more on how verticality plays a role in hormone production and subordination?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you mentioned, I believe that what this is going into is if you have that 1 to 1 branch aspect ratio,
Yeah.
how do you choose which one to prune off if need be?
No. Well, again, my key things are, if I got a choice, I want to prune the most upright one. So again, we want to keep a more flat, horizontal orientation because research has shown that flat orientation has a lesser likelihood of failure or breakage. And then how much you cut back on that branch to prune, again, depends upon the size of the branch and how much you really need to cut to have a positive impact on reducing the load. So it's really very situational depending upon the branch.
Um, what can you speak a little bit about how tree species and age works into prescriptive pruning?
Species, well, when we're talking about species, that has a lot to do with, well, we all have our favorites and lesser favorites to prune. For example, I hate pruning pin oaks and I hate pruning
That's
honey
yes. That's
locust tree because there's such a dang mess. But the the thing is species doesn't really matter. What matters is it does as far as how aggressive you can get. And oftentimes I think about how good a compartmentalizer is it, because that allows me to think about how big of a branch I can prune and get away with that has a potential for good recovery as opposed to inciting decay.
um, as for the PPQ qualification course, we have a lot of people interested in that and how you could go about getting your PPQ qualification.
Yeah, yeah. Just you can contact me, and I can give you the information on it, or you can contact the Florida chapter of the ISA if you're wanting to host or participate in a PPQ.
How do you talk when you're doing a prescriptive pruning or you're prescribing a pruning treatment? how do you talk and do you show a customer what that is going to look like over the years?
Yeah, and again, it's just like anything else. When it comes to arboriculture, an educated client is one of your best clients. And a lot of times, when I'm talking about pruning, if I'm working with a client, then I'm going to have my tree care company prune, not my company, but a company that I recommend. I'll have pictures before and after, and I also basically have kind of a short little PowerPoint printed reduction cuts and how that helps loads on trees, and it also, I'll tell you the one thing too that it does is it minimizes the number of cuts. You're not
Mm-hmm.
cutting near as much, wounding the tree near as much if you're prescriptively pruning for structure. And that's a key thing to articulate to your client is I'm going to prune less. And also I like the fact that I spend less time in the saddle. So that's and that's
Yeah.
time is money. So
Yeah. I've got Kevin Parent here says, when you have to cut on a close to even ratio, do you try to leave a stub or cut it clean?
when you have to cut to what ratio?
When you have to cut close to an even ratio.
Well, well, that's a good question. I'm making the assumption he's talking about perhaps natural fractures or cornet cuts. And heading cuts, there's some folks doing some studies around the world on the impact of a straight, nice clean cut next to that pseudo-lateral, or do we leave a ragged cut? And some of the early anecdotal research is saying that if you have a cornet cut or kind of a ragged end, then you actually the tree will initiate more sprouting. And that's what we want. We want the tree to reiterate what was lost. And it takes a lot of time for that to develop, but once the smoother cuts don't initiate near as many sprouts as the fractured or cornet cuts, is what I'm reading and hearing so far. But a lot of times it's just a matter of appearance. Some folks don't like. They're like, "Oh, you didn't cut that smoothly." And
Mm-hmm.
again, there's another educational lag in the fact that we need to educate them on. That's like a storm. We want to get up there and clean up all those tears and broken ends, but natural fracture pruning is all about leaving those so that we can initiate an increased response for sprouting.
Um, I just had a really good one here and I just lost it. Oh no. Hold with me. Um,
I see one here about city guidelines on clearance for
mm-hmm.
sidewalks. Yeah, well, and therein lies the situation. If you've got a lawn strip, and as city forester ran into this all the time, our first inclination, or I should say first temptation, is to do a removal cut on a newly established tree. But if you can reduce it even within the boundaries of the sidewalk and the curb and leave it, yeah, it looks like a stub cut. It looks kind of weird, but you're still leaving on some branches and some leaf area that's helping that tree establish even better. And also remember, like I said, when you reduce it, that branch is basically just going to stop. It's going to put on the brakes and it's not going to move. And then your resources are pushing up where you want it. And then what happens is when you eventually do need to make that removal cut, it's still small because you've basically stopped it as a result of pruning. So it takes some time to adjust to that type of protocol, but it does work. Believe me, I've done it and seen it.
Um, so how at what point when you're looking at a tree do you decide pruning versus cabling or bracing something?
Uh, that's a rabbit hole, man. With tree support systems, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with them. I mean, there's certainly very appropriate mitigation tools for trees that are candidates for it. But there again, are they candidates? And I've installed cable and bracing and I've sold it, and you know, there's been times where I've gotten up in the tree to install it, and they're just not good candidates. There's not You can't get to the proper location in the crown, or the branches won't support static cabling. I think the dynamic cabling has been a real godsend for us. We did one down in Florida that's been through 3 hurricanes now, and it's
Ooh,
the dynamic cabling. And it's done
wow.
very well, and it's on a tree where compartmentalization is not even in its vocabulary,
Hmm.
and we didn't have to make drill holes for the static hardware, and it's really done well. So I'm I like the dynamic cabling.
Yeah. Um, we do have webinars on dynamic cabling as well, just so everybody
Yes,
knows.
good
Uh,
stuff.
uh, for anyone who is looking to take the CEUs quiz, you should be able to click on the Google Docs form there. It is a little quiz that you can take. If you get 16 out of 20 on that, you will get your CEUs. Uh, Otherwise, you can contact Lindsey at his consulting group website there. Uh,
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions or wants some materials, just email me or hit me on that website. And I've got a ton of stuff on my website that's
oh, yeah.
free and download that's anybody's welcome to use.
And if you do not have your certified arborist qualification already, please go ahead and look for the course that we've done with him on TreeU, the Certified Arborist Prep course. It's We recommend that wholeheartedly. It is probably the most successful course for training for certified arborists.
How many people have taken that course now,
I'm
Kale?
we're over 2,800 at the last time I've checked. So
Nice.
yeah, it's a lot, and it's overwhelmingly positive. So please go check that out. Lindsey, do you have anything else you wanna say before we get out of here?
No, like I said, I'm happy to, if you reach out, I'm happy to help out there, and be safe out there. And if you're interested in, learning more about prescription pruning, I'm happy to talk more about it. But it is a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
We've been teaching this course nationally for a year and a half, and we've we've taught hundreds of people, and they all say, "Wow, what a change!"
Yeah,
And it does make a difference. So. Thanks
great.
again, Kale, for having me here. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Lindsey, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Great. Have a nice night.